Hi, everyone. Welcome to this ProcessMaker 3 training session, which is part of the beginners training series powered by Diapo Diamond. I am your host and trainer, Afe Araram. For our seventh session, we shall be discussing user management in ProcessMaker. At the end of this session, you should know more about users and groups and departments and roles and how to create them, how to edit them, how to delete them, how to manage them. And in addition to all of these, authentication sources. Let's begin. We head over to the admin section of ProcessMaker by clicking on the admin option in the main menu. So once you are there, you see that the workspace in the admin section of the application is divided into two panes. We have the left pane that contains the admin menu and submenus, while the right pane displays the view for the admin menu option selected on the left. So on the left, as you can see, the admin menu consists of 4 tabs. We have settings, we have plugins, we have users, and we have logs. Now, as the name settings implies, the settings tab contains options for configuring ProcessMaker options, or sorry, settings, such as the logo, email, and so on and so forth. Then the plugins tab is used for adding, enabling, and disabling plugins to ProcessMaker. So plugins are a very good way for extending the capabilities of your ProcessMaker installation or application, but it's out of scope for our beginner series. That is a topic to be dealt with in our advanced series. Okay, now for enterprise editions, the plugin tabs also displays the license details and options to enable and disable some enterprise features. Now, the login tab is where you can view logs from events, emails, the emails that have been sent by the application, the cron or schedule tasks, and the case scheduler. Now, we've talked about giving a brief description of the settings tab, the plugins tab, and the logs tab. But the tab we're interested in for now is the users tab. And when you click on users, you can see that we have a couple of options there. There on the left, you can see users, groups, departments, roles, authentication sources, as well as the user experience option. So we shall be looking at how do we add the user, edit users for groups and departments and so on and so forth. So let's start first by considering users. So clicking on the users option on the left displays a list of users on the right. So which is the list of users in the system. And we also have the opportunity to add new users. And as you can see, there's just one user in this instance now, and that's the admin user that we have been using for this series, for the tutorials, for the lessons, and even for building our demo process. Now, in your organization, you may not have access to the admin user. You may have your own personal account, user account on your ProcessMaker instance, but you may have been given for you to have access to designer. You may have been given a system administrator role. So roles too is something we'll be looking into in this lesson. So let's see, how do we add users to ProcessMaker instance? So as you can see here from a submenu, there's the new, there's the edit, there's the disable, delete, and if a user is selected, you can edit that user. You can see a summary of the user's profile. You can disable a user as long as the user is selected on the list. You can delete a user, and you can see what groups that user belongs to. And you can see what authentication source that user account is tied to or is tied to. Okay. So we have a list of users we want to add for the MSB Corporation. So these are the users we want to add for MSB Corporation, 7 users. So let's get started and quickly add them. So the first one is Anu Bello. Let's see what we can do. So we click on New. So type the first name, type the the last name rather. Then the username is a combination of the first name and the last name with a dot. That's how the syntax or format for your username may be different in your organization. It may be maybe the first letter of your first name, a combination with your last name in full. It could also be your official email address. It depends on what your organization wants to use. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we shall be using a combination of the first name and the last name with a dot, a period in between. Okay. Now, for the email, we shall be using, this user has its own email address. Wait. Now, you can see to the role is operator, and that's always the default role there. So let's just give this user a simple password. And you can also choose that the password you set while creating the account will be a temporary password by checking this checkbox. If you check the user must change password at next login, it means whatever password you've typed in here in the change password section of the form will be changed as soon as the user logs in and is forced to change his or her password. Well, for the purpose of this lesson, we shall be on checking this. Then you can also decide, upload a profile photo for the user in this section, and you can indicate other preferences. For instance, if the user logs in, what should be their landing page? We could say it should be home, and it should always be the person's inbox, okay? Once that is done, you save and the user is created. Now, if I select this user I have created, we can always click on the edit button and we are back to the user form and we can edit whatever details we would like to edit there. And by default, you always see the status to be active and the role to be operator. You can always change the operator to whatever role you want by default, any default role you want or any custom role that you've created. Okay, now something else I want to quickly mention here, apart from all these other fields that are optional that you may want to fill, and who will be the replacement employee or officer for this person when the person is unavailable on leave. There's also something called the expiration date. So when you create an account, there is an expiration date. And it's always like 1 year. So where today is 16th of November 2024, and you can see the expiration year date value there is 1 year from today. So what this means is that when it is 17th of November 2025, this user will no longer be able to log in. So it is the system admin that will have to change these dates and give it a later date in the future so that the user can log in. It's basically for security purposes so that When users leave your organization, they don't, and then your system admin forgets to disable them, then they don't have access to your instance in perpetuity. Okay, so when you finish editing as usual, you can always save and you are back to the users list. Let's quickly add a manager. Our Hassan is a manager. So is supposed to have or is expected to have a manager role on ProcessMaker. So let's quickly create an account. Our Hassan, username, our.Hassan, and then sorry, for the email address, let's add email address, and the role would be the manager role. And let's give her a password, and let's add default landing page be inbox. Okay, let's save this. Then we have Audu Bako as a system admin. So let's add one like that. This Audu Bako, username Audu.Bako, and then always making that mistake. Audu Bako, and is meant to be a system administrator on ProcessMaker. Give him a password, and then default landing page for him would be not home, but the designer. Okay, and then we can save this. So we've added a user that's an operator, a user that's a system admin, and a user that's a manager. Now, if at any point in time, any of these users no longer need to have access to your ProcessMaker instance, it's a matter of selecting that user and clicking on disable. Once you do that, you see that the status of that user becomes inactive. So it's also not good on your production instance for you to delete users. It's better to just disable them, better to disable the user. Or for your test environment, you could delete users. Now, when you want to delete users, you should know that there are cases, whether active or completed or cancel case or cases they've participated, that data will be impacted as well. That's why it's good practice to only disable users on your production instance. Okay. So I'll quickly add the other users we have on this list, and then we'll continue the lesson. So we have 7 users to add, and as you can see, they have been added here in their names, the usernames, email addresses, and their roles. Okay, so let's see if we can log in now as Anubelo. So let's log out and type in the username for Anubelo, his password. You see that Anubelo can log into his account now. And you see, because Anubelo is an operator, he has access only to the home menu or the home section of the ProcessMaker instance. Okay. Now let's log in as our Hassan, that is a manager, and let's see. So let's log out and log in as our.Hassan, and you see that our Hassan, who is a manager, has access to the home section, the dashboards section, the admin section, but not the designer section. Okay, so let's log in as Audu Bako, that's the system admin. So you can see Audu Bako as a system admin on the instance has access to designer and can see the processes that exist on the instance. Okay, so let's go back to our admin instance, our admin account, which we use for the purpose of these tutorials. Now, we've seen how to manage users, add a new user, edit the user, disable the user, and so on and so forth. What about groups? Groups as a second option on our users list. Groups, when clicking on the groups option, displays the list of groups that are available on your ProcessMaker instance. Now, groups in ProcessMaker makes it easy for us to assign tasks, process permissions to a set of users as opposed to doing it one by one. So let's assume or in context of for an example, let's look at the cash advance requisition and expense retirement process that we are working on. We expect that every employee of MSB Corporation should have access to that process and should be able to either raise a cash advance requisition request or case on the process or raise an expense retirement case on the process. So imagine that MSB Corporation has 10,000 employees. It would be tedious for us to start for every process we design that the employees need to have access to a task. Then we start adding employees one after the other. Now, if we have a group called employees and we add all the employees to that group, it makes it very easy that whenever we need to assign a task to all employees, we just assign that task to the group employees. And everybody that is inside the group employees will have access to that task or that process. So that's one of the very good advantages or merits for having groups as a feature on ProcessMaker. Okay, now let's see, how do we create groups? How do we create groups? Let's see. For the process we're working on, cash advance requisition and expense retirement process. Remember, let me open my designer in a new tab now. If we go to the process, we'll see that there are tasks for the employee. There is a task for supervisors. There is a task for finance officer. So let's add a new group for employees. So it's a matter of clicking on, let me start again. It's a matter of clicking on, while you are on the groups page, you click on the new button, the create new group modal dialog comes out, and you are able to type in the name of the group, and then the status by default is always active. And then we save that. You can see that we now have one group on our list and status is active. There are 0 users and this group is assigned to 0 tasks. Now, let's add a second one. For this one, let's call this supervisors and let's save and add a third one and call this finance officers and let's save. So we have something like this. So how do we add users to a group? It's quite easy. There are 2 ways you can do that. You can do that from the groups section or from the users section. Now, it's much more convenient to do it from the group section because for you to do it from the user section, you will need to select a user. For instance, let's select Anu Bello, and then we'll click on group, and then we'll click on assign, and then we'll need to select employees and add it to the list. Now, once we do this and we go back to users, or we go back to groups rather, you will see that employees now has 1 user. But it means that if we have 500 employees, doing it from the users page would one by one. This option of adding users to a group is only very useful when you have a new user on ProcessMaker, and after you've added the user or created the user account, you then want to add that user to all the groups that they need to belong to. In that case, that's why you click on assign group and you see all the groups here that are available on the instance, and you can select the ones that user is to be assigned to. However, if you want to assign users in bulk to any group, it's better to do it from the groups section or the groups page. And for that, you select a group and then click on users. Then this page opens and you click on which opens and shows you the number of users or a list of users that are already assigned to that group. Hence, this title here or label, assigned users. So you need to click on assign users button to be able to indicate which users you want to add. Now, I want every user on this instance, apart from the admin or the administrator, to be a member of the employees group. So we have a couple of buttons. If you want to add one user, you click on the user and then you click on this button, this first button here that has your greater than sign, and that selected user is moved from the left section to the right section, from the available users section to the assigned users section. Okay. Now, you could also select multiple users using your shift key, or multiple users using your control key. So if I want to add Ruth Ovie and Isosa Edekin, I will hold down my control key or button while I click on them or select them, and I can add them. But if I want to add every user that's available, I click on this double greater than, and of course, they all move here. But I don't want the admin user to be a member of the employees group. So I select it and just move it back. So I have every user that's available on this instance except the admin user as a member of the employees group. Once you've done that, let's go back to groups. And now you can see that there are seven users in the group. Okay. Now back to our process, we can see that the supervisor group, we add supervisors later, and there's the finance officer group, and we'll add the members of those group later. This is just to show us how easy it is to create a group, add users. You can also edit the name of the group if you are no longer comfortable with whatever name is used there. But be mindful of this in case you have used the name of that group as part of a code in one of your logic in one of your triggers, then there might be a problem. But don't worry about that for now. You could also delete a group, and that's another possibility that is, or another option that is possible with groups in ProcessMaker. Then the next we want to talk about will be departments. Okay, so departments in ProcessMaker allows us to replicate a hierarchical structure of the organization in ProcessMaker. And as you know, a user can only belong to one department. That's the principle of use here. Normally, okay, let's just see how we can add users. But in practice, I really don't advise to setting your organization structure in ProcessMaker. Why? Because it means HRO or whoever will be responsible for managing users will in your organization and managing the organizational structure, departments, rules, and the like. We need to be top notch in be very vigilant. If a person leaves the organization or a person joins the organization or a person moves from one department to another, those changes need to be reflected here as well, especially if you have built processes where you use task assignments like reports to. We're going to get to that in our next lesson. You'll get to understand how the task assignment reports to depends on the department structure that you have defined on ProcessMaker. Um, I, in practice, based on my experience, I find it tedious to do that, to use departments. There's a better way of managing your users and managing who they report to, as we would see in our demo process, uh, as a better alternative to using departments. But for the purpose of teaching you about departments, let's see how we can add departments. It's the same, you can add a new department. Let's call this admin or administration. So when you create a department, you can edit the name. You can add users using this users button. You can assign users to the department. You could also have sub-departments under departments. So if I want a, a sub-department called drivers under administration, I would click on or utility, the utility staff, cleaners, and the rest. I would ensure that the parent department is selected, and I can add a new sub-department. Let's call this utilities. And you can see that the utilities department, let's change, make it a capital or uppercase U. Let's save. And you could also indicate who the manager is supposed to be. You can indicate who the manager is supposed to be. That drop down will show a list of users that you've assigned to the department. So let's see. Let's do let's add users to admin. Let's assume that we have Adeola, Adeoye, and Bako Audu and Chidi Alex. Let's assume they are the ones there. And when you go back to departments, you see there are 3 users here now. And automatically the manager has been selected as this. So let's see. We can decide that the manager is not Adeola because this was automatically selected. And we can say, okay, the manager is Audu Bako, and we save, and that reflects here. Now, under utilities, we could also add users. I can add Ovie, Ruth, and Anu below. We add that too. Let's go back to departments now. And immediately you see that if we check edit, there's a manager here too has been selected, Ruth Ovie. Now, you can indicate if another user that is different from the auto assign manager. But it's also quite possible that that department does not have a manager, especially as it's a sub department. So you choose no manager selected. It means by the structure defined, the manager for utilities will be the manager for administration. So in other words, if no manager is defined for a sub-department, then automatically everybody in the sub-department reports to the manager of the parent department. So that's just what I wanted to clear out there. Okay. Now, I'm going to leave this at this. We're going to use this for our next lesson to explain the reports to task assignments. Well, let's proceed now to roles. Now, clicking on the roles option, see that by default, there are three roles defined and configured on ProcessMaker. There's the system admin role, the operator role, which is always a default role for any new user you create, and then the manager role. Now, on the list, we see the roles that are available on ProcessMaker, and we can also create new roles. A user can only have one role in ProcessMaker. A user cannot be both a system administrator and an operator at the same time. Now, each role has a set of permissions, and the permissions assigned to a role controls what the user can do in the ProcessMaker instance. Now, while groups, on the one hand, are used to control what a user can do in a process, permissions or roles control what the user can do in the application. So groups are used to control what a user can do in a process, while roles are used to control what a user can do in the ProcessMaker application. Okay. Now, if we select the admin role and click on permissions and click on edit permissions, you see that all permissions, all available permissions are assigned to the system administrator role. If we click on the operator role and click on permissions, you see that, and click on edit, you see that there are still available permissions here. Only the assigned permissions are just a subset of, in fact, there are so many other permissions left that the operator does not have. And you can also define a custom role by clicking on this. You create the code, the name, and then the status. Code is this here, the ProcessMaker underscore. So let's assume we want to create a director's role. Then we'll click on this. It's best to follow the same practice there and say ProcessMaker underscore director. And then the name, of course, will be director, and status will be active. When we save, it's created. And now we can select it back and go to permissions, click on edit permissions, and define what permissions that the role of a director should have by going through selecting what we need from all of this. But again, that is beyond the scope of this beginner training series. So let's go back and let's delete the ProcessMaker director. Okay. The next is our authentication sources. This is used to define additional authentication sources for authenticating users when users log into ProcessMaker. The default authentication source is ProcessMaker's MySQL database. Let's see if let me use ADSQL to access the database for this ProcessMaker instance. If I open, you see this is the database for our test ProcessMaker instance. Let me filter the tables for user. I go to users and I go to data. You can see the users we've added. So the default authentication source in ProcessMaker is ProcessMaker's MySQL database. For enterprise editions of ProcessMaker, we have organizations who have an existing Active Directory or LDAP directory. And so you can set up an authentication source that is not ProcessMaker's database by adding a new, then you can define the provider, LDAP, Active Directory, and once that is configured, whenever human resources or HR adds users on your Active Directory, it's a matter of coming to ProcessMaker and syncing, running a sync. Once you run a sync, the newly created or whatever users that exist on your Active Directory that are not currently on your ProcessMaker instance will be automatically added. Same thing with your departments and your company's hierarchical structure or organizational structure. ProcessMaker can import all of that data and metadata from your LDAP instance or your Active Directory instance into ProcessMaker. And whatever passwords have been set for your users or your employees in the Active Directory is what they will use to log in ProcessMaker. And that is why if we go back to users and you select any user, there is always an authentication button. If you click on this now for Adeola Adeoye, you see that the authentication source is ProcessMaker MySQL. Now, if we had LDAP or Active Directory connected or configured on this instance, it will also appear on the list. But for now, we have just ProcessMaker MySQL as the only sole authentication source for this instance. For user experience, you select a user, you can come under the user experience column. If you click on that, there's a drop down, and the options you have is the normal, which we're already used to in terms of what we've done on our process. Then if the preferred mode of usage for the user is going to be mobile or switchable between desktop view and the mobile view, or as a single application. Okay, you can check that out by yourself. It's quite easy to do that. So with that, we've come to the end of this lesson, and hope you've enjoyed and learned from this. Look forward to having you for the next lesson.